Good morning everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Now this video I actually filmed as part of my Ask Ali, and as I said in that video, I just felt that this deserved a video all on its own. So you will hear me doing a very short introduction saying now to the next question. It was a question asked by a few of you, could I do some swatch comparisons? And I know a few of you are waiting on that and deciding whether or not you want to get the Desert Haze palette. So I hope that this is helpful for you, and I'm going to add a few more pictures than I would have done if I'd put it in the Ask Ali video. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy it. So the last question was a question a lot of people asked, and I've just been so overdue with doing it, but it's the swatch comparisons with the new Desert Quad. What is it? Desert. You're all screaming now, you see. I've gone blank again. It's not Desert Dusk. It's Desert Haze, isn't it? I've got Desert Dust stuck in my head. Anyway, so the Desert Haze palette. Now, I've got to admit, I looked at this and thought, oh, where do I start? Because how many browns has Charlotte got in her palettes? I could be here all day. So I'm not probably going to do a comprehensive list of every single brown that Charlotte's ever brought out. And because I'd be swatching down this arm, up this elbow, across my chest and down this side if I did that. I'm going to find the closest ones for you so that you can see what it's closest to. But there will be other browns, and you know, there's so many browns that Charlotte's brought out, it would be madness. So I'll try and find you the closest ones. So let's start by looking at this palette again, shall we? Now they're all matte, as you know, and the prime shades, they're all the prime shades, a lot of the prime shades are going to look quite similar. But however, Charlotte has got very few prime shades that are matte. Most of her prime shades are shimmery. But I'm going to have a look at Sophisticate, which I know is lighter than this. But we will have a look, and I will just double check that there are no other prime shades that are matte. Just to remind you, here's some swatches of the Desert Haze Quad and a couple of pictures of the quad in its full glory, just to remind you of what it looks like on its own. Okay, I can't see any. You can correct me if I've missed any, but I can't see any other prime shades other than Sophisticate that are matte shades, okay? So I thought what I would do is, I have though spotted a palette that has got very similar, not the same, but very similar smoke and pop dash define shades. So I will show you that in a second. But I thought, let's just show you Sophisticate against this one, because Sophisticate is the obvious comparison with Desert Haze, because it is the all matte palette, so that you can see these two together. There we are, there we have them together. Now, as you can see, these are cooler browns, as I've said all along, and these are warmer browns. But both are really good if you've got hooded lids, because hooded lids love mattes. Okay, mobile lids you can get away with a bit of shimmer, but around the hood, definitely mattes. So let me just show you again, very much cooler. This is the prime shade of Sophisticate, and this is the prime shade of Desert Haze, a lot warmer and peachy shade. In fact, I think it's one of her darkest prime shades as well, in Desert Haze. And it's a really nice peach shade. You know, if she went a tad darker, she couldn't call that a prime shade. but it is actually lovely, and it just really nice peach shade. And I was just thinking, actually, some of my spots are going now, but that would be a really good shade to cancel out my brown spot. Perfect peach for that. Because pigment is... Okay, so there really isn't anything that compares with the prime shade. However, and as you can see, although they're both matte shades, these don't compare. They're cooler, a lot cooler. Let me just swatch you. I think it's useful to swatch you these together anyway, because they're the two matte palettes. So if I just swatch Desert Haze first. There's the peach, prime, enhance, smoke, and not pop, define, isn't it? All right, just wipe down my fingers. So we have prime. It feels a very similar formula as well. Enhance. Smoke. I think this palette's getting quite old, so it's dried out a bit on me. And pop. And she did call this pop, even though it's a matte shade. And that one's slightly warmer. Okay, but I did find two shades that are quite similar to these. Not the same, but similar. And that is from Transformeyes. Let me just show you that. Transformeyes, Desert Haze. Sort of, this one's a darker version of that. And they're just a similar colour scheme, except you've got, obviously you've got your shimmers at the top there. This is like a shimmery version of the prime shade. So I'm going to just swatch you this one, this palette next to here, so that you can see. So this is the prime shade. Let's swatch that here. Then enhance. Obviously that's not really similar to much. And then smoke. And the smoke looks very much like the define shade of this one here. Very similar. And she didn't call this pop either, did she? She called this define. Oh no, she did call it pop. She did call it pop. So this is the pop shade. Oops. It's always quite crumbly and silky, that one. So that's quite a sort of darker version of that, somewhere in between these two shades. So I'd say that Transformeyes is very similar colour scheme, but you've got the two shimmers there. And that was the main one. Now I'm just going to have a quick look at the larger palettes for you, and I'll be right back. Okay, so there are, again, some very similar shades in the Charlotte Darling palette. So let me just show you the matte shades in the Charlotte Darling palette. So here is the third shade in on the Charlotte Darling palette. I'll just show you all the matte shades on Charlotte Darling. Here is the fifth shade. And here is the last darkest shade of Charlotte Darling. Okay, and then I'm going to show you all the three brown matte shades in Desert Haze. They're very similar. Now, because they're very similar to Charlotte Darling, it follows that they're going to be very similar to another palette. They are very similar, look at that. So if you have Charlotte Darling palette, you may want to think, do I need Desert Haze? The sun is now going to shine in. And likewise, if you've got stars in your eyes, because Charlotte Darling palette, I wasn't going to get Charlotte Darling palette because they are repeats of these shades here and this shade here. And then there's one shade from, I think one of the shimmer shades is from the Bella Sophia palette from memory. But these are repeats of what's in the Charlotte Darling palette. So again, you're going to get repeats with stars in your eyes. If you've got stars, now the reason I got Charlotte Darling, even though they're repeats, is because I like the convenience of having that. And I actually have that. These ones get stored away with all my palettes, which I have in a box, and I, decide if I'm going to use them. This one gets carried around with me because it's so convenient and the colours blend so easily. And I just bought this for the convenience, even though I knew that it was repeating shades from this palette that I already had. So eventually that's why I succumbed to this palette. But they are repeats of this, and this was actually made official, by the way. It wasn't just that we spotted it. Charlotte came clean and said they're repeats from Stars in Your Eyes palette. But that's why I got Charlotte Darling, even though they were repeats. But if you've got Stars in Your Eyes or Charlotte Darling, you may want to consider whether or not you need Desert Haze. They're not completely identical, but once you swipe those on your eyes, they're going to look very, very similar. I'm actually quite surprised at how similar they are. Very similar. Okay, so that's Charlotte Darling, and those are the three browns in Desert Haze. Very similar indeed. Okay, although I do love this shade, which is not identical to these, but very similar. Okay, so I hope that answers that. There isn't anything else really. I mean, the Icon palette, they've got browns in, but they're not completely matte. And the other palettes, I will just double check to make absolutely sure. I haven't looked at my Instant Look in a palette, but again, there aren't that many matte shades in an Instant Look in a palette. There are a few, but they tend to be, in our Instant Look in a palettes, they tend to be one matte and two shimmers, or two shimmers and one matte. So I don't think you'd feel like you were duplicating anything, even if you've got similar shades, because you've got a mixture of shimmers and mattes, whereas this is all matte. And this has got, the Charlotte Darling palette has got 3 mattes out of 6. So you could feel like you're being duped a bit if you get both, okay? Sorry, the sun's coming in on my skin, which is great for photographs, but not so good for doing videos. Hi everyone, you'll probably notice I'm in different clothes and different makeup. I just popped up just before I put this video out because I spotted another similar shade, but I don't think it's going to be too significant, and I'll explain why. So just to remind you, there's Desert Haze, and I found a similar shade in the new Copper palette, Copper Charge palette. So you can see that this one is quite similar. I'm just going to swatch you those two. So it's sort of somewhere in between. There's one matte shade in the Copper Charge here, and it's in between these two here. Okay, so I'll just swatch you those two. This is the smoke shade of Desert Haze. And this is the enhanced shade of Desert Haze. And then underneath, I'm going to swatch you the smoke shade of Copper Charge so that you can see. So it's kind of in the middle, similar one. But the reason I don't think it's too significant is because this is an all matte palette and this has got 3 shimmers in it. So, and it's enough different for you to kind of, with the other 3 shades thrown in, that I don't think you're going to feel like it's duplicating it. But I thought I can't put this video out and not mention that, because it's one of the newest releases before Desert Haze. Okay, and I'll put a picture here just so that you can see. Okay, quick go through some of our other big palettes. There's a couple of shades there that are reasonably similar. This was the first one she brought out, which is what the palette that was called the Instant Eye palette, but I've lovingly called the Curry palette, because if you sniff it, it smells like curry powder. I never use that palette anymore, but and it is quite old now. I kind of keep it just for comparison's sake. And then we have the other big palette, which is Starry Eyes to Hypnotize. There is nothing really there. That the matte shades are very different. Okay, so Stars in Your Eyes palette or Charlotte Darling, you may want to consider, if you've got those, you may want to consider whether or not you need Desert Haze. I hope that's been helpful. And not forgetting the other palette, Transformeyes, which I mentioned before. So it's Transformeyes, Stars in Your Eyes palette or Charlotte Darling palette that are quite close to the Desert Haze palette. So any of those 3, you may want to reconsider Desert Haze. And before I get completely blinded by the light, I'm going to say goodbye for now, because I'm about to film my next video. Take care and see you all in a minute. Mwah! And don't forget to come back to Ali M's Beauty very shortly, when I will be opening my cohorted box for June, which arrived today. So I'll see you very soon. And thanks for watching. Love you all. Mwah!